Good to go. So, good evening and welcome to another Molby on the Spot. This is our second attempt at this old video stuff on YouTube. Delighted to be doing it with your friend and mine, the Liverpool legend, Mr. Jan Molby. Good evening, Jan.
Good evening, Trevor. You're making me nervous now. It's
Yes.
2025, modern technology.
Yeah, all the things that can go wrong lie ahead of us, man. But let's embrace it for all it's worth. We've loads of places to go, but just so we can get a broad outline for people who want to maybe tune into a section of the show, I do want to start by talking about this. The reality now of the quad no longer being a conversation and what that means. I would like to expand that out into the broader thing about the FA Cup, if that's okay with you, because I know it's something that's close to your heart and to anyone who's my age as well, but it seems to have a different meaning for modern audiences. Then, of course, we have Everton to look forward to tomorrow, and then Wolves, and I think we'll give a good chunk of time to both of those because they're big old games, and that's what this month is all about. And if we have time, I'd like to factor in a little bit about the Joe Gomez injury and whether or not you think that's going to impact us. So let's start. Let's look back on the most relevant thing that's happened in recent times, which is Liverpool exiting the FA Cup. Now, can I just get an immediate bit of feedback from you in terms of what was your honest reaction at the final whistle? We can maybe take it from there into what that means, whether or not the FA Cup has changed in terms of your placing of importance on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's almost impossible to fit the two domestic cup competition into a calendar. I know we're in the final of one, but in the earlier rounds, we equally took chances where on another day we might have got knocked out. So my first reaction after the FA Cup was disappointed with how that team we picked played. And I think that's all it boils down to in the end. People are making all sorts of suggestions. And I go, well, in the end, it was to do with the 11 players that was picked and how they played. They didn't play well enough on the day to win the game. At no stage, really, Trevor, did I wasn't disappointed with the starting 11. I was surprised with the bench, but equally, I wasn't disappointed either because I'm thinking, the manager's thinking, we're going to be 2 or 3-0 up here and then we can introduce a couple of the young players and we'll take it from there. We just never, ever at any stage played well enough. And it's funny because now people are obviously talking about the players who's given a run out on Sunday and how their future is. And they go, well, if they play like that, they'll never make it at Liverpool. But they would never play in a lineup like that again, would they? If, Diaz or whoever, when he comes back into the team, well, it won't be that type of a lineup, is it? So where many games are won and lost, Trevor, midfield, we didn't really turn up in midfield. I think Arne Slot felt that this is an opportunity for Harvey Elliott to do the heavy lifting. Go on then, Harvey. You're very close to our first 11. This is a chance for you to go to Plymouth. Yeah, difficult enough, isn't it, but to run the game. But as I said before, we just didn't do enough.
Yeah, first of all, can I just say thanks, because it's nice to hear a balanced answer to that question, because it seems to be you must go one of two directions. Either Slot disrespected the competition or our players were atrocious. And of course, the reality is somewhere in between. And I think you're right. If you looked at that bench, you could tell that the manager probably wasn't as serious about this cup as a lot of people may have liked, who are interested in that quadruple thing. It really did send a message, I think. The fact that Curtis Jones is on there and he did not even get a run out, that's interesting. You have to say that's interesting. It speaks to other concerns. The fact that there's no go-to, in case of emergency, break glass, big stars on there to come and rescue the tie suggests that maybe it's not that important to him to rescue the tie if it's not rescuable. But the main thing is, what really bugged me, what upset me was that lads didn't put their hand up and say, hey, look at me, Gaffer, especially Harvey, because I think an awful lot of us are quite high on what he has in his locker in terms of his technical ability. Most of us are aware that he's probably not going to be able to hack it there in the midfield department from a defensive point of view. And when you saw him towards the end of the game, sort of deepest man, quarterback, and playing more inaccurate passes, which is not like him because he's very, very good usually with his distribution. It just felt really frustrating. I think what threw people, Jan, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think what really threw people was when you see that forward line of Diaz and Jota and Chiesa, and you think, well, surely Liverpool should do this and do that. And I think it's a fair argument. I think any neutral observer would say that's a strong enough 11. That's pretty much what you've said. And you look across the back line, that should be strong enough. The keeper is good. But it did feel, didn't it, between the bench, the combo, Jan, of the bench and playing two kids in midfield with Harvey Elliott as the senior man, that's where you could see compromise. And you have to be a little bit maybe slow in the uptake not to see there a preference being expressed by the manager, a priority being shown by the manager.
Yeah, I just think if I have a choice, Trevor, do you want to go strong defensively, attack, or in midfield? I would always want to go strong in midfield because they can have such an impact on the game. But just coming back to, I see the headlines there, no more quad. I mean, Arne Slot took the FA Cup as serious as he wanted to take it in that moment in time. He's obviously weighed up what are the consequences of changing the quad, because you don't win the quad until the end of May when you win the Champions League. So all you do in between is calculated how much risk am I prepared to take to chase a quad. And he's probably looked at it and all thought, well, let's start with nobody's ever won it before. So that in itself, it's almost self-explanatory, isn't it? And then he thought, well, okay, this is the risk I'm prepared to take. I'll run that gamble and I'll give these players a run out. Absolutely 100% he thought it would be enough. But on the day, and I don't mind that, Trevor. On the day, it was Plymouth's day, wasn't it? You know, they're having a rotten season. Although they've now got a new manager and they've signed a couple of defensive players, and maybe they'll get themselves out of the trouble they're in, isn't it? But it's kind of, I think, because of the expectations of our Premier League teams now, even on a day like this, it all becomes about Liverpool, doesn't it? You know, and I think we could maybe find a balance in between that. Yes, Liverpool played their part in not playing well enough in it, but you know, in the days where the back page belonged to the Minners, or you know, the ones who caught the surprises, and now the kind of headlines is, you know, Arne Slot's first mistake, or Arne Slot disrespects the FA Cup and whatever. So good luck to Plymouth. I bet much doubt they'll win it, and I don't know how they feel about the draw. I haven't got to go to Manchester City, isn't it? But yeah, it was a day that belonged to them.
It was, and I think an awful lot of people, again, maybe don't have the benefit of the amount of years that you and I have been watching, or in your case, being part of football to such a high level, and these things do happen. It was part of the season story for great teams of the past was, the cup exit, or you know, the plucky lower team takes advantage on the day. But just in terms of having a look over the game for what it was worth, because I think you have to put it in the context that you have put it in. Speaking about the comparative strength of the bench, speaking about the personnel that he chose to use, speaking about the midfield and his decisions around that, especially not taking Curtis off the bench when that midfield was clearly an issue. So the only thing that remains then is to see what could we take from it. And my thing was, like I said to you, did anyone put up their hand and say, look at me? And I didn't feel they did. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but I thought primarily it was an opportunity for Harvey, who's the most sort of borderline there. Diaz knows he's going to be involved. Jota knows he's our best finisher. Chiesa is borderline at best anyway. But all of them huffed and puffed. Now, to me, I felt the forward line felt disjointed from the rest of the team because of that midfield situation. And so it felt like a kind of a perfect storm for no one to really shine. And even the likes of more experienced people like Tsimikas, again, just not quality on the night, not forcing anything. So in terms of a review of the game, did you see anything to take from it, or is it one of those ones you write off?
Well, yeah, I mean, the sensible solution would to go, well, okay, let's forget all about that and move on to the next one. What it actually reminded me of, Trevor, was that back in the day when I used to play, we used to have reserve teams, and who played in reserve teams were the first team lads who weren't involved, and then you had a squad of reserve team players, and then injured first team players. And sometimes it's like, coming back from injury, you go, do I have to do this? And it almost felt like there was a couple of Liverpool senior players who kind of went, why am I playing? Because there was almost this thing about, because also there were so many young players on the benches, and you think, why am I playing? So we never really got what we're famous for. We never really got any energy into the game. The energy in the stadium was all for Plymouth, and we couldn't really use that either to our advantages. And so it's kind of one of those low-key affairs where, people can scream and shout at you and go, get going, and you kind of go, it ain't happening. And it just wasn't happening. And you're right, you mentioned Simicas as well, which was another senior player, and you're thinking, have an impact, but he didn't really.
So the only other thing of note from it, before I broaden it out to talk about the FA Cup briefly, is we did lose a player, which is tremendously disappointing. We are in a good place. It was only last week you were quoting that stat about how we're in the best shape we've been since 2007 in terms of having players available to the manager. But here we go now with a very important utility footballer who's also just an excellent footballer. End of story. He can do a great job wherever you put him. And the full extent of the injury seems a bit vague. I thought the press conference details about it were a bit vague. To say he wasn't going to be involved in the next game is hardly a shock. Maybe it's not quite as bad as initially feared, but with Liverpool and injuries, you never want to speculate too much because it's quite often they can rumble on for weeks and we just don't get told stuff. And maybe that's the way it should be, Jan. In terms of the potential loss of Gomez over this ridiculously condensed period of fixtures, we had the Aston Villa game inserted into the middle of this to make 5 now in this February situation. Yeah, granted, we will have the break on the back of being out of the FA Cup further down the line, but we've got these bang, bang, bang Sunday, Wednesday rotation, huge Premier League games where it would have been handy to have Joe Gomez.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder whether, the Aston Villa game getting moved to the 19th of February changed the idea that analysts had about the FA Cup game. Because it's another game, isn't it, in that same month. But yeah, in terms of Joe, it's a shame. He's found it really difficult for a while now to get into that rhythm. And football, as good as you can be, is all about rhythm, innit? And it's also about rhythm about your body, isn't it? It's not just rhythm about you playing well, it's rhythm for your body, getting used to training and playing. And this boy's just been very unlucky. Sometimes you just dealt a hand where, the body, Joe Gomez's body can't cope with playing 60 games a year, which he's probably never had to do because of injuries and whatever else, isn't it? But he's just been very unlucky, isn't it? So yeah, we're going to miss him, aren't we? Because it leaves us a little bit short in key areas should anyone get injured. But I tend to agree with you, is that I hope it's not too bad. I hope it's not too bad. And I think he's going to be back before we can blink. Well, let's hope so anyway.
Fingers crossed, because the big push is obviously to get this league title, and it seems so attainable, Jan, that any little blow at all is magnified, I think, in people's minds, and it's understandable. Just one last thing on the Gomez thing. When you've picked up as many knocks as Joe has, obviously it's not necessarily anything to do with where you are. There was possibly an argument in the Klopp era where people used to say it was how we trained and stuff like that, but that's not really when Joe got his injury, so I don't know if it ever held any water. But he is a fella who's earned an awful lot of respect and kudos and gratitude from fans in terms of what he's been able to do, the fact that he can just slot in and be great wherever he goes. Do you think he might be one of the many, because it's looking like there could be a good lot, judging by some of the stories we're hearing, who might be on the move in the summer in an attempt to sort of revitalize his career and get a go somewhere else? There was big rumours during the summer, Jan, about a move to a London-based club. It seemed to be more than just talk, and then it never happened.
Yeah, and I also think that, when you have players who aren't regulars in your starting 11, I think there's almost like a shelf life on how long they can be at clubs. You know, it's different if you're the goalkeeper, but I think as an outfield player, so Joe Gomez has been at Anfield for a number of years now, and he's played a lot of games, but he's never really been part of the starting 11, the strongest 11 we've had. So I think there's a shelf life. And I think this is very difficult, Trev, is that when you come towards the end of your career, it's very difficult, but I guess it's priceless to be able to find somewhere where you can play. Because most players' career, where they enter that declining period, you play less and less and less. So I think Joe is probably thinking that in the sort of peak of my career, in my mid to late 20s, I chose to stay at Liverpool because I wanted to be at Liverpool and I wanted to be part of that. And I accepted that I wouldn't get as many games. But maybe now he's thinking, well, okay, I've had all that success and I've had a great time, but now I really want to play. You know, I want to be able to go somewhere and play. And I think that's really important for. It can be difficult for players, Trevor, who play a lot of games when they're young and a lot of games when they're in their mid-20s. And then when you get to later age, you kind of, but you played your games, haven't you? Whereas I think Joe's probably looking and thinking he might be 100 games short in his career, and he want to pick them up late in his career. So I think it's important for him to try and find somewhere. Ideally, and you're absolutely spot on, last summer there was a lot of rumours, and I think there was quite a hefty fee on Joe at the time, and I think it'll be the same again this summer. I think Liverpool are going to go, listen, Joe, if you want to try something else, we'll do everything we can to try and find you somewhere.
Yeah, especially when things like the Mark Way to Liverpool things are starting again. It's interesting to see that, and it's hard not to imagine there might be, well, there'll obviously have to be movement the other way. I feel like I want to talk to you about all of those speculations and contracts and potential moves, but it's all so pie in the sky. And I promised you last week we're not going to do it unless we've got something. And even this, though the rumors were coming from our respected sources, it's still just guff as far as I'm concerned until we get somewhere a bit closer to it. So just to wrap it up, I wanted to talk to you about, as a man who's part of one of the most storied FA Cup wins ever, for my money, and I think a lot of people's, and the official money on the day, the most effective performer in that FA Cup in 1986, where the double was achieved in Kenny's Roy of the Rovers season, you know, player manager, all that crack. Part of it again in 89, possibly one of the most important trophies Liverpool have ever won, just because of the context, was that FA Cup in 1989. It felt so important to us as fans, no doubt to you guys as players, to the people in the city in general. It feels a little bit demoralizing that this thing that was such a huge part of football has diminished in status. I wonder if you could track it for us, because an awful lot of people point the finger at old Alex Ferguson there and say, well, it was him and the way that United, wasn't it Club World Cup or something they preferred to go to or preferred to engage with, or withdrew from the FA Cup. I honestly can't remember the specific details, but I know it caused quite a hoo-ha at the time. And then I think there's the emergence, isn't there? If you're a club that's currently at our status, that you're now part of a second league. So by definition, the cup competitions, the domestic cup competitions will diminish. And that the FA Cup is so much harder to win in a way. So now you get cynical. Is it a combination of all of those things, or is there something else, Jan, that has taken away a little bit from the magic of the cup? Because that Plymouth win should have been one of those things that, you know, is part of the storied history of this trophy.
So I think football itself has a big part to play in what's happened to the FA Cup. Just to go through my own experience, Trev, and it was one of the reasons that I wanted to come and play in England, was to play at Wembley in a cup final. And when you talk about playing at Wembley in a cup final, there only really was one, and that was the FA Cup. And, you know, 2 semi-finals in 85 and 90 and 4 finals. You know, so it was a big part of what we did in those days, and it was great enjoyment. But I do think that the Champions League came along, and then we had almost this, like, getting the top 3, getting the top 4. that's a trophy in itself because of financial fair play was introduced, and now we need to get our hands on as much money as we can, and I think that's when he started to drift a little bit. But I do think that with a new sort of ownership group, we a lot of Americans own or whatever, and they do chase the glory, don't they? So I do think that a lot of bigger clubs over the last few years have sort of re-evaluated the importance of the FA Cup, isn't it? But I think, many games, and it's strange, because when you look at the Carabao Cup for big in the semi-finals, it's just almost as if, I don't know, it's almost as if it fit better into the, with the cup rounds earlier in September, October. As now, with clubs being in the Champions League, whatever, you ain't messing with the Champions League knockout games, are you? You don't run the risk, do you, of being in the FA Cup might affect how you perform in the Champions League, isn't it? So I think it's a shame, but I always understand from within clubs how you think and how you feel. But we all know, Trevor, we say this every year, don't we? We go to Wembley, when we go to Wembley on the 16th of March, it'll be an unbelievable experience again, because the Geordies will turn up in equal big numbers and make it a great day.
Well, that's it. Again, in terms of, just to go full circle back to it, if you're looking at this from the manager's perspective before the game, we're in a final. To get to another one in the domestic cups is going to take an awful lot of work, a lot of effort. And I think that explains perfectly why he went with the bench he went with, why he went with the midfield lineup with two kids and another guy who's not nominally certainly not the position he was asked to play. I think it explains a lot. But it's just interesting, I think, again, for people of a certain vintage, the whole conversation about disrespecting the cup, Jan. I think it doesn't hold a whole lot of water for people who are younger, but for those of us who've been around a bit, you can see where it comes from. And it did have such great status. Like, you just briefly, you talked about the concept of coming to England and playing in an FA Cup final. You mentioned 85 and 90, and then the four finals as well. Like, getting as far as the semi-final, I recall, because 90, of course, well, you tell me, remind people about that semi-final in 90, because there's certainly a story there.
Well, it was obviously Crystal Palace and an emerging Crystal Palace. We played them twice in the league, and we'd beaten them 9-0 at Anfield and 2-0 down at Selhurst Park. And yeah, of course, FA Cup semi-finals are always tricky down at Villa Park. But how they thought they were going to hurt us was obviously long balls and set pieces. And on the day, they had good deliveries. But yeah, it was drama beyond 4-3 to Crystal Palace. In the end, it's a great piece of FA Cup history, isn't it, Trevor? And you have to get your FA Cup history from somewhere and your memories from somewhere, isn't it? So that, of course, we would have loved to have won, isn't it? That's what it was all about, isn't it? But it's an instant recognisable FA Cup moment, isn't it? So it's part of enhancing the FA Cup experience. And of course, then they went and had a great final with Manchester United as well, that they eventually lost after the replays. And so all these things are also equally important, isn't it, Trevor? That, as much as we want to be green, we want to win everything, isn't it? But, sometimes it becomes part of the history that other clubs cause surprises. Wimbledon in 88 and Palace in 1990, isn't it? It's part of it.
I was just going to Wimbledon because people need to be reminded of that as well. Because, it's last week you were talking about how, as a player, you were thinking in that kind of just, it was starting to fade a little bit, and the younger lads at the club were saying, we have to win 15 of our last 15 games, and some of you older heads are saying, well, we've done that before. It is doable, and have that muscle memory is fantastic. But it comes from that era where, there were a couple of doubles left sort of behind, and it must have really stuck in the craw. Again, as someone who wants to gather up as many medals and trophies as you can in a career, the double was the thing before the current era of football. it was such a rare thing. It was done like in 61 and 71 and 81, and then came around again. And you guys could have had maybe 3. The most spectacularly obvious one that was denied was the Wimbledon final. And again, people don't really understand what that meant. Liverpool were, and it was billed as the aristocrats against the plucky sort of, let's say there was a thug or two in there, but the plucky lads from London. Just explain to people what that was like, because the glory is one thing, and Jesus, nobody celebrated more than we did. But I honestly, as a fan, didn't know what to do with myself on that day in '88 against Wimbledon in the final. Just maybe if you could revisit for us in terms of the feeling around the club going into it, because I think it's important. People always think that the stories about Liverpool and their attitude towards medals and trophies are exaggerated, but I've heard you and others talk about that. It was just another game in many ways, but people didn't see it that way.
No, and I mean, we all know what Bill Shankly said, didn't you? Liverpool's all about winning trophies. That's ultimately what we aim to. We do. Finals are always difficult. We spoke about the semi-final before 1990. The FA Cup semi-finals are played towards the back end of the season, but there's more games to be had after that. Whereas the final, back in our day, was always the last game of the season. So there's a whole different feel to it, isn't it? Because you finish with the trophy, great. You got 6 weeks to celebrate, and you don't win it. It's kind of a shitty feeling, isn't it? So Wimbledon '88, we 100% knew. So Wimbledon came into the Old Firm in 1986, and we knew exactly how they felt about playing us. Because they were what they were, Trevor, yeah? And it's kind of this attitude about who are we going for? We're going for the biggest guy in the room, yeah? And that was pretty clear by Wimbledon the moment they got into the first division. We're going for the biggest guy in the room, yeah? Now, in terms of a league season, that was obviously never ever going to happen, was it? Over 42 games or 30, whatever. They were never going to get anywhere near us. But when they were given an opportunity like this, they were going for the biggest guy in the room, isn't it? So we were well aware of that. We very well knew that. I remember the first time we played at Plough Lane, and you think, why? Because it's, like you said before, it's another game, isn't it? So we go to Plough Lane, it's another game. You said, no, this is just not another game. You know what I mean? This is the game. This is almost like the reason that they are in the first division. They can't wait. Now we're in town. And we went, and they hadn't really settled into the level yet, and we comfortably beat them 3-1, isn't it? But you kind of sense that they almost probably got in that dressing room after the game and looked at each other and went, at some stage, we got to get these guys, you know what I mean? And they got us on the biggest stage. We didn't underestimate them. We look back at things, and I still see Peter Beardsley on a regular basis, and he scored that goal that was then dropped for the free kick. And we look back and go, what would have happened had we scored inside the first 30 minutes of the first half? They wouldn't have been able to execute what was a perfect defensive master plan from their backroom staff, but they would have probably had to play the game a little bit different, and it might have been different. In the end, it wasn't. And again, I spoke about the Palace game before, isn't it? But this is certainly a much bigger story in terms of the FA Cup history over the years, isn't it? So it fits in. It's disappointing, and you mentioned the doubles. Yeah, it was actually a number of years ago when somebody said to me, was Kenny Dalglish any good as a manager? And you kind of go, yeah. Kenny was a good manager and came in, won a double in his first season. Then when Ian Rush was sold, he rebuilt the team and whatever. And it wasn't until then I started looking. I thought, wow, he could have actually won with a bit of luck. He could have won 4 doubles in his first 5 years. And as you correctly pointed out before, Trevor, that was the big achievement in those days. So, yeah, you look back and you think inches. But it's no good because we didn't get over the line. And it's not like, we weren't a team you could accuse of not knowing how to get over the line. We knew how to get over the line. We knew how to win things in it, but things don't always go your way.
Yeah, and I think what was even more pointed about Wimbledon was an awful lot of people, Jan, believe, for right or wrong, and you may have a different opinion. I think I do myself, but that 88 iteration, when the lads had come in, Barnes and Beardsley and Aldridge was banging the goals away, Ray Houghton was knocking about as well. in terms of recent signings to that, you, like you were saying, the remodel after Rushy. A lot of people thought that was as good a side as they've ever seen, and people talk about the performance against Forest, the 5-0 in that season and stuff like that. So I think that was what really made the contrast as well. I think, were you aware that the squad was so highly rated that, because let's call a spade, you walk straight into a very successful and respected squad. The rebuild after Rushy, I think people genuinely were shocked at how well it went, weren't they?
We were shocked.
Yeah.
You know, I remember the time, and we've often discussed this in the program, that, you know, I was big friends with Ian Russ, and when we decided to sell him, it's kind of, well, whatever you do, don't sell your goals. You know, and we're talking about 30 plus every year. Don't sell your goals. What are we going to do? But this is kind of comes back to, was Kenny any good as a manager? And I think the way he rebuilt that team, you know, everybody goes 4-4-2, but we never played 4-4-2, Trevor. You know, so we've often discussed, we played 4-4-1-1. We got the best sort of number 10 in the game, in between it and Peter Beardsley. We got a great goal scorer in John Aldridge that we limited in terms of what was expected of him. Just be in and around the box and you get supplied, but you get supplied from everywhere. We went away from having a right winger. Previously, we had, like I said, Craig John, Sammy Lee. We then had Ray Houghton, who would have been a modern day footballer in terms of how he stepped into midfield, centre midfield. So we got an overload, play 3 against 2, 4 against 3. And then you had John Barnes, who could do it all. John could also step in, but he could also go to the byline. So the majority of crosses would come from John on the left, but then you had great supply line through the middle, through Peter, knocking balls into John. And so it was, you know, if you'd have had all the facilities you do today in terms of analysing how the team played compared to how the others played, I think a lot of people have got a big shock in how we did that. And, you know, I put that all down to Kenny. I knew how Kenny felt about intelligent footballers. You know, people who could play in a number of positions, people who could take up positions at the drop of a hat where you need it. You know, that kind of thing. Not where we tell you to be, but where do the game need you right now? You know, and you know, we picked up some really clever footballers from that Ian Russ money and improved the team. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Your point there about the 4-4-1-1 is really interesting. It's well made, and I wonder, do you think that was that just continuing on? Because I've been watching a lot of stuff recently from that era. Just there's a couple of fantastic accounts. I'm going to give him a shout out again, but it's Davola on Twitter. Fantastic footage again and again, day in, day out. And there's some great stuff there. And it's interviews around the time of the double and stuff like that. And Kenny being asked in the changing room about, you know, is he planning to retire or is he taking himself out of it a bit more and all the rest of it? Do you think, you know, obviously there was the kind of teething spell there and Paul Walsh was involved and stuff like that. But do you think that's what he was looking to do with Beardsley, was to recreate what he had with Rushy, with Beardsley and Aldridge in terms of that sort of thing? Or was it a slightly different tweak? Because like you said, you had that real productive winger and goal scorer in Barnsley as well. Did it feel a bit like a succession plan in terms of keeping a similar shape with players who could do similar things? I'm not saying Beardsley was Dalglish, but he was as close as there was around at the time.
Yeah, Peter was a terrific footballer. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And didn't necessarily get off to the best start, although the team got off to a terrific start. But Peter might not have got off to, because Peter's very harsh on himself because he knew what he was capable of doing. But when you look back, so obviously you mentioned Paul Walsh. Now, Paul Walsh was signed by the previous manager, Joe Fagan. And Walshy was totally different. You know, Walshy was also somebody who liked to drop into the hole as a dribbler. You know, he never had that vision that Kenny had. He never had that vision that Peter had. So he was a different type of player. And I just think Kenny's thought, it's, you know, you have that picture in your head as a man and you go, how do you want to play? This is how I want to play. So I need these type of players. And I have to be honest, John Aldridge, we were aware of John from Oxford. I also was a Liverpool fan and thought, yeah, his record stands to scrutiny. So John Barnes, yeah, terrific footballer, Peter. But the one we never was Ray Houghton. You know, we were going up to Scotland to play in a testimonial when we signed up. And it was kind of, who's he? You know, Ray Houghton, Oxford. You know, we played against Oxford. You know, you kind of go, can't remember him. You know, You know, it's not like today where you would get every game on TV. It's like, they have knocked them. What are we signing him for? But you quickly realised, and I think he started his first game on the bench and came on and whatever. We quickly realised it's this kind of thing, isn't it, about the way that we play. Ray was perfect for that. You know, Ray wasn't a big, strong winger. He wasn't quick running in behind. He wasn't good in the air, but he was a good footballer. You know, and he was got to get plenty of the ball to do what he did. And so it just worked 100%. Trevor, believe me, it worked 100%.
It sure did. Some of the best memories of my life, man. I'm not going to lie to you. We have some big games ahead, and we start with, of course, the local rivals. And, you know, just in case people are somewhere in the dark in terms of what's ahead for Liverpool, tomorrow evening, that's Wednesday the 12th, if you're not sure when we're recording this, we go to Goodison Park, and then we come out on Sunday at home to Wolves. The following Wednesday, we go to Villa Park, and then we go to Man City the following Sunday, and we come out the following Wednesday and we play Newcastle at home. And just in case you thought that was the end of it, there's a little bit of a break there, but then we're back on the road again, and the Premier League fixtures just keep ramping up. But this February run is mental with the Sunday, Wednesday turnaround. Let's focus on the first two with the hope, Jan, that we'll get a chance to talk before the next two about the two that we've just seen. And we'll start obviously with Everton. And, you know, people have maybe not a huge amount of knowledge of where things are for them. There was an awful lot of talk about, you know, are they really falling off at the start of the season? I think you can understand. People were sort of genuinely concerned that they might drop out of the division. They're sitting in 16th now, on 26 points, I believe. 26 points. They've got themselves a little bit of fresh air between them and Wolves. It's interesting that Wolves are the next team, some 7 points off them on 19, with a game more played. So Everton are starting to feel a little bit cozier now in themselves, and it's only a point ahead then to West Ham on 27, who also have a game more played than Everton. So Everton are starting to feel like they have a little bit more about them, and we know they've got a little bit of a boost, a little bit of shot in the arm there recently. And just again, before I set you up, in terms of the most recent results for them, so people have an idea how they've been getting on. Last time out wasn't so good. They were beaten in the FA Cup 2-0 by Bournemouth, and that was at home for Everton. But they had a 4-0 win over Leicester City in the Premier League on the 1st of February. Previous to that, they had an away win at Brighton, 1-0 at Brighton. And previous to that, a 3-2 win over Spurs. That's when the little renaissance seems to have kicked in for Everton. And they do appear to be a different prospect, Jan, that we might have been facing if we'd been playing them a bit earlier in the season when we were supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, when we were due to play them early December, obviously Sean Dyche was still the manager. Sean Dyche is a good, honest manager, but I just think it ran its course. You know, ever since he set foot inside Goodison Park, it's been nothing but problems, and he's never really been capable of getting the team moving. He's never really been able to get him away from those bottom places. So it was only a matter of time. David Moyes, yeah, I always think it's a brave decision to bring back an ex-manager, but he did it. Gave him a shot in the arm. I mean, Manchester United came to Anfield early 2025. And you kind of go, give me a reason why United got a chance. The only reason you could give at the time was that rivalry between Liverpool and Manchester United. And I almost feel the same on Wednesday, because we're having a better season than Everton and we got better players. So what is the chances? Why is it such a big game? Well, it's because of the rivalry. And we've come unstuck there a few times in the last few years. So the Bournemouth game in the FA Cup at the weekend, they were well beaten. They didn't even do what they normally do well. They didn't defend well. Tarkowski, who we know what Tarkowski brings, and he didn't play well. There was quite a number of them who didn't play particularly well. Now this one, they'll play well, but there'll still be a limit to how well they can play. So the performance they've had under Moyes that they need against us is probably the one at Brighton, where they was backs to the wall, defend, and got the goal. I think it was from a penalty, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, we've put too long in the tooth for this, Trevor. We just know what he can be like to go to Goodison, isn't it? We know how they're going to play. It's going to be a low block, 9 men behind the ball. Everything that comes into the box, they're going to head and kick clear. We need a bit of luck. You know that Tarkowski is going to be a man mountain. You know that Pickford is going to make 3 or 4 saves where you go, how did he do that? So it's going to be one of those games. All those things I've just described there will be part of the game. That doesn't necessarily we won't win the game, but it's just a question of can we break through? Going the other way, I think it's going to be a long way from Everton's defending to attacking our goal. They got better up front, was a willing runner. But you do have 1 or 2 injury problems. We've got quite a few of their most influential players. So, then on top of that, Trevor, it's the last ever derby at Goodison Park. What will that mean? Hey, the old stadium will be rocking, absolutely rocking.
I think that's a huge thing to factor in. As someone who's played there a lot over the years, Jan, yourself, I don't think people really fully get it. I wasn't expecting it myself as a naive Irishman coming over, in the period of time where it was the friendly derby was the phrase that I heard before I actually got to Goodison Park and experienced the lack of friendliness on an extreme scale. And I think you put your finger in something there, man. That will be a factor. It can't not be a factor, that atmosphere. And the fact that it could have real significance for them. I think, and I'm hoping, that you factor in all the lads who come back, your Szoboszlais and your Salas and your Max and your Cody Gakpo's banging form, people like that. You have Virgil on that pitch. And I think, like you said, we should have too much, but we can't underestimate, Jan. It is really significant that this is the last derby at Goodison.
The first 3 times I went to Goodison Park, Trevor, the first one was I played in Mark Higgins, an ex-Everton player's testimonial. Then a couple of days later, I went to watch a league game, Everton against Chelsea. Chelsea won 4-3. And then at the turn of the year, I went to watch a game in Europe, Everton against Bayern Munich. So I went to Goodison 3 times before I even played there. And this was at the start of, I think you're allowed to call it Everton's golden era, 84 to 88. What an atmosphere it was, Trevor. It was unreal. So I can imagine tomorrow night it'll be something similar because, this is the one game, isn't it, where almost regardless of how the game's going, they're going to stay with their team, aren't they? They're going to stay with the team. They're going to show, because we know the world we're watching. Yeah, it's going to be you just got me going now, Trevor. I mean, I'm going to the game, so yeah, I'm looking forward to it even more now.
Same. I'm added excitement. The fact that you mentioned that, I had forgotten it. It's great. So here we are, G'ing each other up. And it's just one last point in this. I mean, the lineup in their most recent impressive win, the 4-0 over Leicester. They went Pickford, Tarkowski and Branthwaite, and they had Mikalenko at left back and O'Brien at right back. And yeah, you mentioned the injuries. They've got quite a few there. There's a couple of right backs. Garner and Guay in midfield. And they had Doucouré, Lindstrom, Ndai, and Beto up top. From their bench, they could bring Ashley Young and Jack Harrison and Nathan Patterson. They all came in. Asmir Begovic is on the bench there as well. They had Harrison Armstrong and João Virginia. And I think I've seen, and Martin Sharif as well, who I'm not familiar with. The point I'm making, and the reason I bring that up, Jan, just to tie into what you were just saying, that golden era of Everton, where you have to give them their flowers, that was what a team that was. They were the ones putting it up to you lot at the time. And not just coming close, but actually winning the titles and, stuff like that. You have to credit where it's due. Do you, when you think back on that iteration of Everton, obviously, you know, there were the stars. You had Graham Sharp banging in goals up front, and you had Kevin Ratcliffe, who was, you know, pretty impressive at the back for them. For me, the greatest Everton player I've ever seen, just because I don't think there was anyone quite like him in the league. And he may well have been one of the most effective in his position I've ever seen, was the goalkeeper. What a player he was, Jan. What a player he was, firing himself around the goal, looked quite ungainly, and yet got to everything in Neville Southall. When you think back on that team, was there any specific rivalry you had on the park, or anyone you pick it?
Yeah. Obviously, Peter Reid and Bruce Bracewell was in midfield and in those days. And to be fair, both of them were competitive. You know, I think probably people look at Bracewell maybe being a better footballer than Peter Reid is, but they could both get after you. Mobile, really, really good players. But he was everywhere, Trevor. And the funny thing was that we socialised with them. You know, so we'd get back to Anfield from an away game, which obviously meant Everton had played at home. And I'd say to Rush, "Are we going for a pint?" And he'll go, "Oh, I'm meeting Rats." Now, Rats was Kevin Ratcliffe. So I'll go, "Oh, tag along," you know. And we would go somewhere and have a pint with Ratcliffe, you know. I was kidnapped at some stage in 1984 by the left back, Pat Mandanao. I met him, and I never forget it, so I met him on a Monday night at some event or whatever, and blah, blah. And I read a slip that I was still staying in the city centre hotel. So when I came back from training the next day, he was sitting in the coffee shop. And somebody said, there's a guest here for you. And I went in. It was Van der Now. He basically kidnapped him for 2 days. Coming here. So, yeah, it was incredible. Well, Sharpie's a really good friend of mine. And funny enough, I was with Reedy not so long ago. And I said, you know, when we played back in the day, Reedy, I never used to see you. He said, no. He said, yeah, and I never moved. He lived in Bolton. So he used to commute between Liverpool and Downey. He said, so no, you never really saw me. I said, no, I can't remember ever running into you. But yeah, all the others, we were just everywhere. We went to the same places. And I mean, today, I don't know how that would go down if you saw Virgil van Dijk and Tarkovsky having a pint together in Wetherspoons in Liverpool, you know. So,
didn't you tell me as well at one stage that Howard Wilkinson also kidnapped you and Rushy in terms of a couple of days out of the races and stuff?
Oh, he went to Royal Ascot with him, which, honestly, God, it was something else. But also, he took us out for the meal, Rushy and me, in Italy in Liverpool. And I rung my wife at 8 o'clock. I said, "Come and get me." You know, she went, "What's happened? What's happened to you?" I said, "Howard Kendall." You know, and I could have a go with the best. Yeah, she said, "I said Howard Kendall." Oh yeah, you couldn't make it up, could you? So on a Friday afternoon, before season due to start, Everton obviously playing. We were playing away, but me and Rush were both injured, so it's early 90s, isn't it? And 3 guys having a meal in an Italian restaurant. Howard, Rushy, and me. Priceless, isn't it?
It is priceless. And I just realised, I just a slip of the tongue actually said Howard Wilkinson. It was a whole different kettle of fish.
Howard Kendall, yeah, sorry, yeah.
yeah, very, very different time. We will come back for a prediction in a minute, but let's for now as well have a quick look at the next hurdle that Liverpool have to leap, which is Wolves at Anfield after Everton. And that's on the Sunday. And it is going to be the 2 o'clock kickoff on Sunday. And for the record, Wolves rock on in the FA Cup, having beaten Blackburn at Blackburn on Sunday. They had a 2-0 win over Aston Villa, which is impressive, and also a local derby win for them on Saturday the 1st. They had a 1-0 defeat to Arsenal with a man sent off on either side. In the previous game to that was the 25th of January, and a 3-1 defeat to Chelsea previous to that on the 20th, and a 3-0 previous to that to Newcastle back on the 15th of January. So they're kind of having the opposite run, if we're being honest, to what Everton are having in terms of the way results are going for them. And, you know, even though they've sort of scooted up a little bit in terms of the last series of results, they are still very much in danger zone territory. If you say Southampton are cut off and adrift on 9 points after 24 games, Ipswich are on 16, Leicester are on 17. Wolves are on 19, and they've all played 24 matches. Wolves are bang in that mix, aren't they, Jan?
Yeah, they are, Trevor, and I think they've been playing at it for a couple of years. Selling really, really top players. The boy Nunes has gone to Manchester City. Pedro Neto has gone to Chelsea. The two Portuguese fellas in the middle, Ruben Neves, and what was the other one, Jorginho. Kilman, the big centre half, he went to West Ham, didn't he? I think they've been at it for a couple of years now, where a good offer was enough to get your best players out, and then obviously try and reload with cheap options. But I don't quite think they've hit the level that they did. So the one thing that saved them, again, is the newly promoted teams. The fact that we now, yet again, seeing that the three promoted teams are not very, very good. So they'll probably be the three that will keep Wolves in it for this year. They do have some quality, Trevor, but consistently, they just haven't been good enough. You lose your ability to defend, then you lose your ability to control games, scoring goals. Yeah, Matthias Cunha is a terrific footballer. Strand Larsen, I think he's out injured at the moment. The Norwegian, God love him, he gives it everything he's got in it, but he's not a natural goal scorer. So they are lacking. And of course, when I mentioned the players they sold, I even forgot to mention Diego Shota, didn't I? Because he's also flew the nest. And so they let a lot of good players go, and they've obviously gambled and thought they could, and they haven't quite hit it.
Yeah, and they had those, didn't they, sort of useful agent scenarios going on there in terms of keeping them supplied with good footballers. And just for the record, their most recent lineup, just to give a little bit of truth to what you're saying there, they had Jose Sa, they had Agbadu with Gomez and Doherty either side in a back three, nominally Nelson Semedo and Riyad Nouri on the flanks, Bellegarde and Andre, the kid we were linked with briefly, in the middle with Sarabia and Cunha, who you've mentioned, behind Guedes. On their bench, there's Santiago Bueno, Huang came on at one point, Rodrigo Gomez, Tommy Doyle. They've got Craig Dawson there as well, Sam Johnston, and in the last day they had Cardoso de Lima as well and Carlos Forbes. You can hear by some of those names that those links are obviously still ongoing in terms of their recruitment, but it seems, doesn't it, as if they are not necessarily in a great moment. However, the Premier League's a bit weird, and their last game was that 2-0 win over Aston Villa, who we'll be very wary of when we're playing them in the near future. So I think we can start to pivot, Jan. I think it's that time where we start to pivot towards getting an idea of what you think it's going to go like in both games. So we'll start with the one that's going to be coming up tomorrow evening for everyone. We're both even more looking forward to it now. The derby against Everton at their place. How do you see that going?
I think it's quite impressive. Everton having scored 7 goals in the last 2 Premier League games at home against Spurs and Leicester. So obviously proof that there is goals in the team. I do however think that the early goal against Leicester opened up that game. I just think it's going to be a typical derby game. We're gonna find it difficult, I think, to stop them doing what they want to do, and that's making it a physical game, defending in a low block. So I think it might take a while before we crack it. But I still think that it'll finish off Everton 0, Liverpool 2.
Oh, that would be very nice. And then the Wolves game obviously coming up very, very hot on the heels in that on Sunday at 2:00. On the face of it, maybe a less challenging one, and yet again, it's the Premier League, and they're just off the back of a good result. So how do you see that one going?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I mean, they beat Aston Villa 2-0. Aston Villa, either side of Champions League games, I wouldn't judge them because they haven't done very well. Nevertheless, they've got some ability, Wolves, and I think Wolves will come. They'll give it a go, and they'll have their moments. So I think the game on Sunday will finish Liverpool 3, Wolves 1.
Well, if there's any bang of truth to those two, it leaves us very much on track for this thing. And I just want to wrap it up by just touching on that briefly. We said it last week about the importance of this month. And, you know, we both said it's easy to say, and it feels almost like a cliche because every month's a big month. But this one, wedged with the 5 games it's wedged with, just does has that extra sort of feel that you were to come out successfully at the far end of that, it might be a massive psychological blow. It feels very much like you think we're going to make the first 2 steps. If you were to be handed, let's say, 2 draws and 3 wins, would you take it? Would you take 4 wins and a draw? Would you take 4 wins and a defeat? What do you think is a respectable return from this 5? Or do we need to actually just go out and win them all if we're going to keep on track for this league?
Yeah, obviously winning all of them is a big ask, Trevor, isn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, the fact that we're playing Newcastle at home, I think, is a big help because I don't quite think they're capable of doing what they do at St James's Park away from home. And I'm not talking about the atmosphere, obviously. I'm talking about the energy and the presence that we saw them against Arsenal in the Carabao Cup semi-final, but you don't really see them playing like that away from home. So I think the fact that we're at Anfield against them, and we normally do okay against Newcastle, I think we'll be okay in that one. And City, you know, people keep telling me they'll do A, B, and C. I can't see it, Trevor. So I actually think we'll go to City and win. So the one what I'm worried about is Villa. You get Villa on a good day, Trevor, where they got the energy in the stadium from the fans and the player. That is a difficult game. So let's stick to 4 wins and a draw.
Yeah, people will bite your hand off for that, I think, even though the greedy people like myself want 5 wins because, you know, there's no pleasing some people, Jan, these Irish lads with their demands. But we'll wrap it up there, and thanks a million as ever for going around the houses with me. Particularly enjoy when we can go back and dip into the stories a bit. I think everybody enjoys that as well. So nice to be able to do that on the back of the Everton stuff today. So for another show, thanks very much.
Yeah, wonderful, Trevor. Wonderful.
We shall wrap it up there. Myself and Jan will be back with you sometime next week. We're going to work that out now in a second when the cameras go off. But we'll be back with you to track through this massive month for the Reds. Speak to you soon.